This episode of the Cliff Ravenscraft Show is inspired by a conversation that I recently had with somebody who is a potential client that I did a coaching session for. And this conversation happened to be with somebody who I discovered was also a fan of Steve Jobs. It came out naturally through conversation. He had said that he had just finished rereading the biography of Steve Jobs that day that we had this coaching conversation. And he found it ironic that I would bring up Steve Jobs in an effort to help him get beyond some of his limiting perceptions of what's possible for himself. This person, just like every other person that I work with, has big dreams, a big vision of something that they want to experience or create in this world. I got a very good sense of what that was. Now, in his mind, he was looking for feedback on his ideas, and he was wondering if there was any advice that he could get on how to successfully sell the first few spots in a workshop that he wanted to do for a specific corporate conglomeration of companies. I certainly gave him feedback as he requested, gave him strategies and techniques on exactly how to frame the sales process. And in my mind, if he was fully confident in what it was that he was selling, and he had absolute clarity on the problem that it solved for the individuals that he was selling to, that there would be no problem at all in making these initial sales by the deadline that he had. Now, there's way more to the context of this specific conversation that are not relevant to what I want to share with you here today. You see, today I want to talk about the fact that you don't have to see the entire path ahead for you to take action on what it is that you want to create. Sometimes you just have to trust your vision and take the next step. Once I had given the feedback and the strategy that this person thought that they most wanted to get from this experience of coaching. You see, I use something called the Prosperous Coach Method for creating clients. I oftentimes will give a full 90-minute one-on-one coaching experience with me with no strings attached and with no expectation or any obligation that you will ever become a paid client. When I'm working with someone, I want them to actually feel the experience of being coached by me before they actually decide to invest in coaching with me long term. That's what I had done in this scenario. This person did not know a lot about me. It was a relatively new connection that I've made. Came to the conversation, just want some feedback. Maybe I'll get some advice on the sales process. I gave all of that, but it was very clear through our conversation there was a lack of clarity about the overall problem that this solved for the client. And also I recognized when I was speaking about some of these initial steps, here's how you could immediately bridge the gap between where you are to what you want to achieve in record time. I've seen this so many different times. If you just take these few steps, I think that will open things up for you. And all I received then and there was a lot of excuses for hesitation. There were so many arguments that were being given for why he wanted to slow down this process. Why instead of going and making a proposal right away, he wanted to go and have conversations and ask them to review a document and shoot holes in it and tell me where I'm missing the mark and all this other stuff. And I'm like, you could go and work on yourself, this presentation, and do your research without all of this stuff. And you could go straight to those people and make this bold proclamation of how your workshop is going to fill the need and it's going to provide the solution for this massive thing that's causing you so much pain and lack of profitability in your business, this inefficiency that's there. And yet, those actions were not actions he was immediately interested in taking. And I asked him, I said, where's the hesitation? He goes, well, there's so many things that I haven't quite figured out. And I guess the reason why I hesitate is because I feel like I have to have the whole thing planned out. Let me ask you this. Have you ever found yourself caught up wanting to create something new, to go out and tell the world about it, and you wanted to take this big leap into some amazing zone of genius that you feel totally aligned with, but you're just simply waiting until you have all the right answers before taking action, that you've got it all figured out? There's a fear that many individuals have that, what if I put myself out there? What if I publicly state that this is what I'm doing and somebody recognizes that I haven't got everything all figured out? I'd rather not make any mistakes and just make sure that everything I do works. I'm much more concerned about doing the right things. And if it takes me 10 or 15 or 25 or 50 years to get it right, I'd rather get it right than to look bad in the eyes of others. Now, I'm somewhat being facetious and exaggerating that because people don't actually say that. I'd rather wait 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 years. How many years do each of us truly have on this earth? How many of you are guaranteed the next 5? Why not now? Take bold action. And the fear is, what if I get it wrong? I really wish I knew that what I was about ready to go do was absolutely the right thing, and it actually is going to work the way that I desire it to work. And I'm like, there's only one way to find out. Go and do it, and then see what the results are. You may fail, but at least you'll learn that those actions aren't going to get you what you want, and you'll come back and make a different approach. Knowing that this individual that I was talking with is such a huge fan of Steve Jobs that not only have they gone through the biography of Steve Jobs once, but also a second time, I happen to know that I could use the words of Steve Jobs to really help this person understand that if you want to know why Steve Jobs was able to have such an amazing impact and bring what I would consider to be miracles into our world, devices that we use today that have transformed the experience of millions, hundreds of millions of people around the planet. He brought these devices into the world, not because when he was a young kid, he had everything figured out. It's just that he went and took bold action. One of the things that I suggested was, hey, is there anybody else that you know that is already doing consulting and hosting workshops at this level? I talked about this in the most recent episode of the Cliff Ravenscraft Show before this, the idea of role modeling. And he's like, yeah, I do know some people who do this. And are they actually doing this profitably at the level for which you desire to do it? And he says, yes, they are. I said, have you ever thought about contacting them and asking them for their story about how they got there? However, when I talked about this idea of going and having conversations with these people, he suggested that it might be a little bit of a challenge to get those people on a call. Why would they want to talk to him? I said, have you ever thought about maybe creating a podcast? He goes, I don't know about putting a podcast together. I don't have time for that. I said, what if you only did 10 episodes of a podcast? The only purpose of the podcast was how to break into the consulting world or whatever, topic it is. And then you go and find these 8 or 9 people and interview them about how they actually got into the work that it is that you want to do and feature their story. Most people are going to be more than happy to help. And he goes, I don't know about that. I hesitate to be publicly vulnerable and put myself out there like that. I'm like, Okay, so for some reason, you're hesitant because you want to have the whole picture planned out. You want to know everything, how it's all going to fit perfectly. I said, I want to play for you a clip from Steve Jobs, the 2005 Stanford commencement address. He said, and he had confirmed that he's heard it many times, but it had been some time. And I said, I want to remind you that Steve Jobs was adopted. His biological mom would only allow his adopted parents to adopt him if they agreed that he would go to college. And he ended up going to a very expensive college, and he decided to drop out because he hated the idea that he didn't really know what he wanted to do at the time. And he saw that his parents were giving up all of their savings that they had ever saved just for him to be at college. So he decided to drop out. And he says it was the most difficult decision of his life, but looking back, it was one of the best decisions he had ever made. And he talked about the fact that even though he had dropped out, he decided to stay on campus. He slept on the floor in the dorm of other friends. He would drop in on classes that spoke to him, that were enjoyable. And one of those classes was a class on calligraphy. And then he said this:
if I had never dropped out, I would have never dropped in on that calligraphy class, and personal computers might not have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. Because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart, even when it leads you off the well-worn path. And that will make all the difference.
Steve Jobs did not have everything all planned out. So much of his journey was simply following his passion, following his heart, following his intuition, following his gut, following a vision of what he wanted to create. And there were so many missteps along his path. And so when I brought his attention, this person's attention, back to this Steve Jobs quote, is like, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You're only going to be able to look back and see the dots, how they all connected, how everything was working out for you. And you have to be willing to fail. Now, that's the other thing. So he expressed to me an unwillingness to fail. And I said, failure is so much a part of the process. Asking for help. So when again, talking about the fact that, whether it's through podcast interviews or any other way to have a conversation who's already gone further than you have down this road to find out what they have done, what can you learn? How are they doing it? Get inspiration from them. Not necessarily that they're going to have all of the right answers for you, because nobody does. You have to find your own path. However, everyone who has gone before you has certainly learned a lot, and they have so much to offer. And if you would just ask, you would find people willing to help. If you would just publicly put yourself out there, even if publicly putting yourself out there saying, I don't quite yet know how to do what it is that I want to do, but I'm willing to learn. And you don't have to do that publicly in a podcast, but you may want to reach out to somebody who you look up to, somebody that maybe you think in their mind, they view you as somebody who has it all figured out and whatever. And you don't want to have them find out that you don't know what they thought that you knew, if you get what I'm saying. But instead, if you could just be vulnerable and put yourself out there like that, you might just find that you get the help that you need. And then I reminded him of a very old interview with Steve Jobs, and I played this for him.
I've actually always found something to be very true, which is most people don't get those experiences because they never ask. I've never found anybody that didn't want to help me if I asked them for help. I always call them up. I called up this will date me, but I called up Bill Hewlett when I was 12 years old, and he lived in Palo Alto. His number was still in the phone book. And he answered the phone himself. He said, yes? He said, hi, I'm Steve Jobs. I'm 12 years old. I'm a student in high school, and I want to build a frequency counter. And I was wondering if you had any spare parts I could have. And he laughed, and he gave me the spare parts to build this frequency counter, and he gave me a job that summer in Hewlett-Packard, working on the assembly line, putting nuts and bolts together on frequency counters. He got me a job in the place that built them. And I was in heaven. And I've never found anyone who said no or hung up the phone when I called. I just asked. And when people ask me, I try to be as responsive, to pay that debt of gratitude back. Most people never pick up the phone and call. Most people never ask. And that's what separates sometimes the people that do things from the people that just dream about them. You gotta act. And you've got to be willing to fail. You've got to be willing to crash and burn. With people on the phone, with starting a company, with whatever. If you're afraid of failing, you won't get very far.
Those words struck deep into the core of this individual that I was speaking to. And I could tell just by his body language, the tone of his voice afterwards, that it sank in deeply. That's what separates the people who do and the people who are just dreaming. You have to be willing to step out. You have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to get it wrong. And you might just find that if you are vulnerable and you just follow your heart, you reach out and ask, you'll find that people genuinely want to help you. Yes, there is plenty of evidence out there that there are also people out there who are seeking to laugh at you every time you fall on your face. But are those the people that you're genuinely concerned about impressing? We had this conversation. It became very clear that his next steps were right there before him. He had previously stated a struggle with hesitation, and I believe that by the end of our conversation, there was some significant momentum and inspiration to go take the bold action that came out of our conversation. Only time will tell. A couple of weeks, I'll check in, see how much action actually took place, and we'll see where it goes from there. But this is something that was on my mind the other morning as I woke up, and I had found a speech that Steve Jobs did in 1983 that I had never seen before. He did a presentation for the International Design Conference in Aspen, and it was the IDCA. And so these are people who are involved in industrial design. He was explaining the computer industry to these individuals. What I loved about it, I was sitting in my reading chair in my office, as I do in the morning, and propped up on my lap was my iPad Pro 12.9 inch with an Apple Pencil, and I'm handwriting notes into my Notability app. That was on my lap to my right. On my left, also in my lap, was my iPhone 16 Pro Max. I'm sitting there watching this speech on my iPhone, taking notes on my iPad Pro. In this talk, he's talking about the state of computers and what he perceives the future to be. People are asking questions like, do you think that eventually people will be able to connect computers to one another so that they can actually share information back and forth and people can communicate to each other from one computer to another? And he was explaining about that, yes, people are working on that. One of the challenging things is the fact that, there's different computer languages. And so, trying to get the interoperability, but that he says that's definitely coming. And then as far as hooking computers up to one another, he's talking about the fact that there's cables. People are finding ways to network all of these computers together. I want you to think about 1983. What was the state of technology then? And as he was talking about this, by the way, he nailed so many things. I'm not going to play all of the various different clips, but he predicted ChatGPT. He predicted so many different breakthroughs that are all reality today. And in 1983, he had such a clear picture of what was possible with computers. An absolute visionary, a guy who knew his desired outcomes from the get-go, didn't know how it was going to happen, but he was boldly taking steps, and steps he took. And did he get it all right? The answer is no. In fact, he got fired from his own company not long after he gave this speech. It's crazy how many steps along the way after giving this speech where things seem to go wrong after going wrong. And he even will say, I was a public failure in the eyes of so many people. All of this came out in his 2005 Stanford talk. It was the most public failure you could possibly imagine in front of all these people. And yet he chose not to give up because he still loved what he was doing. He still had the vision of what he wanted to create. Now, I'm sitting here in the context. I had just had this conversation that I was referring to earlier. And so now I'm sitting here listening to this Steve Jobs talk, and I want to play this clip for you, and I'll come back and explain why it resonated with me at such a deep level.
Apple's strategy is really simple. What we want to do is we want to put an incredibly great computer in a book that you can carry around with you that you can learn how to use in 20 minutes. That's what we want to do, and we want to do it this decade. And we really want to do it with a radio link in it, so you don't have to hook up to anything. You're in communication with all these larger databases and other computers. We don't know how to do that now. It's impossible technically. So we had three options. One was to do nothing. And as I mentioned, we're all pretty young and impatient, so that was not a good option. The second one was to put a piece of garbage computer in a book. And we can do that, but our competitors are doing that, and so we don't need to do that. The third option was to design the computer that we want to put into the book eventually, even though we can't put it into the book now. And right now, it fits in a bread box, and it's $10,000, and it's called Lisa. And it just so turns out that, fortunately, there is a giant office market out there that is buying these things a lot faster than we can make them. We're sold out for the next year. And we'll sell over $100 million of those things the first year. So, fortunately, there is an office marketplace where enhancing personal productivity is absolutely worth $10,000 a person. And they're gobbling these things up, and they will pay for the development of this new technology. The next thing we will do is we will find a way to put it in a shoebox and sell it for like $2,500. And that'll be the next step. And finally, we'll find a way to get it in a book and sell it for under $1,000. And we will be there within 5 to 7 years. And that's what we're working pretty singularly on.
Okay, so many things. First and foremost, Apple's strategy is really simple. They had an end result in mind. Here's what we see as the future. We want to put an incredibly great computer into a book that you can carry around with you. He was not talking about a laptop computer. He was talking about what is now known as the iPad. He wanted to create something that would be the form factor of a book that you could carry around with you. And he says, we want to do it this decade. Now, here's the thing. He had a desire to do it before 1993. However, it did not come about by 1993. See, this is where it's like, did Steve Jobs put himself out there? Did he proclaim publicly, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to do it within this decade? Absolutely. That's what he stated. In fact, later on, he says, and we will be there within 5 to 7 years. So when he didn't get it within even the decade, he had even said he'd be there within 5 to 7 years, that we would have this book-like computer device that you could carry around with you. Now, he didn't even just say that you'd have a book-like computer device that you could carry around with you. And I just need you to understand, this was 1983. It is so important that if you are not aware of what life was like, technology speaking, what technology was available to us, what having a computer was like in 1983, it may be hard to really understand the importance of this next statement. He goes, what we really want to do is we want this computer that's in the form of a book that you can carry around with you. We'd like it to have a radio link inside of it. We'd like to put a radio in there so that you don't have to hook it up to anything. We don't want to put a modem in this thing and have you connect it to a phone line. In fact, when you think about, so you don't have to hook it up to anything, he's also envisioning the fact that you won't be plugging it in either, that it will have a battery life, that you can walk around for many hours. And why did he want a radio link? So that you will be in communication with your computer in the form of a book that you can carry along with you with no cables, so that you will be in communication with larger databases and other computers. Sound familiar? And the next line, we don't know how to do that. This is what I love. He's speaking out there and saying, listen, this is what we want to do. We will create a computer that's in the form of book that you can carry around with you everywhere. It'll have a radio built into it so that you don't have to connect any cables, and you will be able to be in communication with larger databases and other computers. That is our singular vision. In fact, he says, and that's what we're working pretty singularly on. That is our vision. And then I love it. He says, but we don't know how to do that. And in fact, it's impossible technically. Yet it's what we plan to do. It's impossible technically. He says, so we have 3 options. Option 1, by the way, the one thing that most people choose to do, option 1 is do nothing. Just wait around until all of the pieces of the puzzle and how every single question that could ever be asked about how is this going to be possible to have what eventually became the iPad, we need to know all of that now before we get started. Let's not do anything until we have every answer to everything that's required to get this exactly the way we want it. That's option 1, do nothing. Option 2, he said we could create garbage that does not align with our vision. Now, that's me paraphrasing what he said, and he's like, listen, that's what other people are doing. He says, we're not going to create garbage. We're still going to create a computer that has the features and the functions and everything that we want. We are not going to back down on what we believe an incredible computer is. We recognize that we're not going to be able to put it in the form of a book right now. We're going to put it into the form of a bread box. We're going to go ahead and design the computer that we want to put into the book, and eventually it will be there. However, right now it fits in a bread box and it costs $10,000 and it's called the Lisa. He said, fortunately, there are some companies out there that are willing to pay $10,000 for a computer that has all of this stuff. We believe that we're going to sell these things. They're going to be, he says right now, they're sold out for the next year, and we're going to sell over $100 million of those in the first year. I don't know how many they sold in the first year. However, I do know that looking back in hindsight, Lisa was Apple's biggest failure. It was plagued by so many things that didn't go right. However, it was an absolutely essential piece to the puzzle of figuring things out. There was a lot of internal conflict. In fact, this got him kicked off the Lisa team. And eventually, Steve Jobs was let go from Apple. And there's a whole story about how he eventually got back. And quite frankly, if it wasn't for that, he wouldn't have been able to create the Next Step software. There wouldn't be a Pixar success that's there, the financial success that when he actually did go back to Apple and he brought back the software with the singular vision of still creating that computer. If it weren't for all of that, it's like he just knew, I have to keep fighting this fight for what I know is the right thing. Now, he said, eventually, we're going to find a way to get this Lisa, and we're going to get it into something smaller, like a shoebox, and we'll sell it for $2,500. And then eventually, we will find a way to get this thing to fit in the format of a book and sell it for under $1,000. And it will have the radio. It will have the ability to connect with all of these databases and other computers. You'll be able to carry it around, and it will take you no more than 20 minutes to learn how to use this thing. And it will cost under $1,000. Now, it took longer than 5 to 7 years for that to become a reality. And there were lots of missteps along the way. But earlier today, when I was fixing my lunch, I was listening to a podcast that talked about the most recent Apple earnings, and Apple had reported earnings of like $1 billion per week. Now, the funniest part of all of this is that I was watching that 1983 talk on the iPhone while taking notes on my iPad. I had two devices, one in the form of a book and one in the form of a very, 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 very small book. And both of them, without hooking anything up, have radios in them that connect me to the most amazing number of databases around the world and other computers. It's the reality. And both the iPhone and iPad, each of them are available. They have versions that are available for well under $1,000. And they definitely don't take any more than 20 minutes to figure out how to use. It's knowing what you want and then not being afraid to fail. It's not being afraid to go out and ask for help. It's not being afraid of what others might think of you if they learn that you don't have everything figured out. It's not about comparing yourself to others. You do not have to see the whole path ahead. Not every decision you make has to have been the right decision. In fact, every decision you make will be the right decision because some of those decisions will lead to what you might term as failure, and some will move you towards success. But I can just say right now, all of the failures that I've had, and I've had some very public failures, my friends, I still make missteps along my journey. And I still get people who criticize me for my missteps. Cliff, how is it that you're in business for this long? And how could you just go out there and tell the world, how much you made a mistake with this and made a mistake with that? Can't you see that other people out there are so much more competent than you are? It's ridiculous how you just don't have your stuff together. Who cares? That person is not somebody's opinion that I'm looking to try to gain their favor. I don't know anyone who doesn't make missteps. I don't know anyone who is perfect. I don't know anyone who has all of the right answers to get exactly what they want, so where everything that they do is guaranteed to succeed. Because a part of the process, in the part of the journey, sometimes is the growth necessary, because some of us have a very real fear of success. And that fear of success is because we might be called to have a greater level of responsibility. There may be a larger number of people that we have the ability to influence and to reach. And with that greater ability, with that greater level of influence, comes a whole heaping additional load of feedback. And the question is are you learning how to handle your emotions and setbacks along the way? Because the worst thing that could happen is for you to accidentally succeed and not make any missteps and grow to where now you have millions of dollars in wealth and you've got hundreds of thousands of people who adore you and all of this other stuff, but nowhere along the way did you learn how to handle your emotions when somebody disagrees with you or when things fall apart. Did you have the opportunity to experience setbacks and growth along the way? You need them. In fact, I encourage you after this, go and watch the entire 2005 Stanford commencement address of Steve Jobs. He needed to go through everything he went through to be able to achieve his singular, almost nearly singular vision of creating a computer that would be in the form of a book with a radio built in that could be carried around with no cables, connected wirelessly to other databases and computers for communication purposes, where you could ask it questions of the studied works of people who were geniuses before and ask it to give you what that person might say. He talked about this in 1983. But to be able to take his vision from 1983, little did he know that he'd have to become a public failure and be fired from his own company for that dream to become a reality. My friend, if you truly want to achieve your vision, if you truly want to experience the reality of your deepest, most passionate dream of your future, if you actually knew everything that might be required of you to get from where you are to there, it might just scare you. In fact, if you were to go back and talk to Cliff Ravenscraft in 2008 when I started this business and tell me where I am today, this is where you're going to be, which is well beyond what my wildest dreams were back then. I am living a life so far exceedingly more abundant and have achieved far more than I ever even dreamed of back then. And if you would have just taken me from there and dropped me right into where I am today, with the level of the game of life that I'm playing today, even the smallest thing that doesn't go right would have crushed the 2008 Cliff Ravenscraft. Emotionally, he did not have what it took to be able to operate with the amount of responsibility that comes with life at the level at which I play it today. And then if you were to go back and say, okay, but don't worry, you're going to man up, if you will, or you're going to grow personally, professionally, spiritually. You're going to have a lot of growth opportunities, but it's going to come through this experience in the hospital where you almost died. It's going to happen with this big contract that you put all of your hope in. It's going to come from this. You're going to have this. You're going to experience this. And I'm like, whoa. I don't think I want all of that. That's not what I signed up for. And in many ways, I think it's a gift that we don't have clarity on all of the things that are going to be required for us to attain that big vision, that big dream. And if you think it's all going to be sunshine and rainbows, your hesitation is going to continue. I hope that you will have such a deep, abiding connection to your dream, to your vision, that it become a nearly singular focus for what you want to create in this world. And that maybe you have a desire to have everything all planned out and figured out, And maybe you hesitate to be publicly vulnerable and put yourself out there and ask for help. And what if people knew I don't know what I am supposed to know to be this whatever expert or whatever? What would people think of me? All of this stuff. If you could just be so connected to the clarity that this is what I'm meant to create in this world. And it might be messy along the journey, but I'm willing to do it anyway. See, this is the thing that Steve Jobs says. Most people don't ask. Most people are afraid to fail. This is the difference between those who do and those who only dream. You don't need to see the whole path. Trust the vision and simply take your next step. Your next failure is your next growth opportunity, and it will be less painful than learning that lesson when you get to your destination. Until next time, I encourage you to take everything you do to the next level.
And then I got fired. How can you get fired from a company you started? Well, as Apple grew, we hired someone who I thought was very talented to run the company with me. And for the first year or so, things went well. But then our visions of the future began to diverge, and eventually we had a falling out. When we did, our board of directors sided with him. And so at 30, I was out, and very publicly out. What had been the focus of my entire adult life was gone, and it was devastating. I really didn't know what to do for a few months. I felt that I had let the previous generation of entrepreneurs down, that I had dropped the baton as it was being passed to me. I met with David Packard and Bob Noyce and tried to apologize for screwing up so badly. I was a very public failure, and I even thought about running away from the valley. But something slowly began to dawn on me. I still loved what I did. The turn of events at Apple had not changed that one bit. I'd been rejected, but I was still in love. And so I decided to start over. I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. During the next 5 years, I started a company named Next, another company named Pixar, and fell in love with an amazing woman who would become my wife. Pixar went on to create the world's first computer-animated feature film, Toy Story, and is now the most successful animation studio in the world. In a remarkable turn of events, Apple bought Next, and I returned to Apple, and the technology we developed at Next is at the heart of Apple's current renaissance. And Lorene and I have a wonderful family together. I'm pretty sure none of this would have happened if I hadn't been fired from Apple. It was awful tasting medicine, but I guess the patient needed it. Sometimes life's going to hit you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. You've got to find what you love. And that is as true for work as it is for your lovers. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life. And the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking and don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know when you find it. And like any great relationship, it just gets better and better as the years roll on. So keep looking. Don't settle.
Hey, by the way, if you are still listening to this, I want to encourage you, if you have a big, bold dream, a vision of the future that you've been hesitating on, and you're looking for a coach who is not looking to be your friend, but looking to challenge the way that you think at the deepest level, somebody who'd be willing to say things to you that nobody else would be willing to say to you. If you are on an entrepreneurial journey, I'd love to hear from you. All you have to do is email me, cliff@cliffravenscraft.com. And especially for those of you who have already succeeded at such a level that you're beyond what you ever dreamed possible before, but there's something deeper inside of you that feels like there's something more. And maybe you've caught glimpses of that dream. Maybe you have clarity about what that dream is, but it scares you and you find yourself hesitating. Email me today, cliff@cliffravenscraft.com. There may just be a reason why God had you listen to this episode.
Most people never pick up the phone and call. Most people never ask. And that's what separates sometimes the people that do things from the people that just dream about them. You gotta act. And you've got to be willing to fail. You've got to be willing to crash and burn. You know, with people on the phone, with starting a company, with whatever. If you're afraid of failing, you won't get very far.